Hello, hello, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by the Hockey Podcast Network. I'm your host, Nick Berlansky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And Horwat, since the last time we talked, the Penguins have 3 new defensemen and have shipped out 2 of their usual defensemen from last year. So fair to say it's been a busy week for the Pittsburgh Penguins and Ron Hextall.
The goal was to subtract defensemen, and we've somehow acquired addition through subtraction. Way to go, guys. We're moving deck chairs, it seems. It really does. And nothing wrong with those parts of the move. We'll get to all of the details later, but on the surface, you see one defenseman out for another defenseman. Cheaper one. Okay, fine. You look into the details, you find out, we're shipping out John Marino for John Marino, but he shoots left-handed. Okay, maybe we can get with that. He's a little cheaper. Sure, we're not going to pay him 4.4 in a couple of years, but you're going to pay him something eventually if you want to keep him around. And then there's another trade where, again, you're shipping out a defenseman. All right, cool. And we're losing Mike Matheson's contract. Even better, for Jeff Petry's contract. Deck chairs. We're moving deck chairs, guys. It's not helping things out that much. But we'll see where things go. Clearly more has to happen. I've never thought our defense was a logjam before. It keeps getting worse somehow.
Yeah, when you look at it,
I don't know how.
Yeah, when you look at it, of course, they're adding more players right now. They still have 9 NHL-capable defensemen on the roster, which is ridiculous almost, it seems. But when you look at it, we'll talk it piece by piece here. Let's start off with the biggest trade that happened over the weekend, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins acquiring Jeff Petry and Ryan Poehling from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Mike Matheson and a 2023 fourth-round draft pick. It is the most recent trade for the Penguins, but considering the fact that Petry is probably going to play the biggest role of any defenseman the Penguins have acquired this past week, then it's probably the biggest trade, especially when you talk about Matheson going the other way. Poehling is somebody who is also going to play a role on the Penguins NHL roster next year. So, Horwat, what did you think of this trade when you first saw it? And now what do you think of this after a little bit of time to digest it?
I probably think the same thing that I thought when I first saw it. Off the top, it is, oh, good, we're losing Mike Matheson's contract because, let's be real, it's an anchor. As good as he was last year, having him stick around for, what was that, 5 years? However long it was at that number is just not ideal. And you want to get out of that somehow. I think that was the first goal for Ron Hextall and Brian Burke when they got in here. It was somehow getting off of that contract because it's not ideal. It's $4.875 for another 4 seasons. Yeah, that's a long time. That's a long time and a lot of money. He somehow now becomes the highest paid defenseman on the Canadiens, by the way. But then also bringing back Jeff, like I said, it's a good thing to that contract. It's good. It's not good that we brought back an extra $2 million in Jeff Petry, who might be able to do stuff. Again, I don't remember all of the details on Jeff Petry. I know he's the key to getting size and becoming a little tougher and bigger on in the lineup. So he does that. But that extra $2 million, once again, with the new Letang contract, somehow Jeff Petry is now our highest paid defenseman.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. That's going to be fun. Yeah, plus the modified no trade. I mean, Mike Matheson gets to go home, which, by the way, your name's Mike Matheson and you're from Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
Canada.
How? I messed up saying Quebec, so I had to mess up Canada too. It's Quebec, fair. But yeah. Yeah, how are you from Montreal whenever you have Michael Matheson, not even Michelle? I'm getting off on a tangent, but that being said, it's an interesting deal. I'll say that. It's the most deck chair moving deal I think we made yesterday.
Yeah, it feels like these two players in Matheson and Petry are almost similar to the point where it's the fact that you're paying a lot of money. They're both very offensively inclined defensemen, but I think the big difference is Petry is a little bit bigger. He is a little bit heavier, but also you do lose a little bit of that skating ability and speed that Mike Matheson brought to the table if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins. Petry's not quite as fast, not quite as agile as Matheson was. So you're not going to see him blazing down through the neutral zone and into the offensive zone as much. But Petry does like to carry the puck still. So you're still going to get an offensive defenseman. I do think, though, he's a little bit more consistent on the defensive side of that defenseman role.
Yeah, and he will be, and that's a good starting point. I mean, we know he's not going to play at the top line minutes because he's going to be sitting behind Letang, and that's fine. Sheltering the minutes is a pretty solid idea, especially for a guy like him. So we'll see where it goes. He's going to have a little more defensive mind, which is good, and that was an absolute downfall of Mike Matheson. That's why I didn't want him on the first line with Letang, is that while Letang, as we both agreed, is great defensively, they both focus on offense, and you still do need a little bit more defense sucking up that many minutes. I will say, though, it leaves our left side in shambles, the whole Marino trade, trying to figure out who's going where, because we don't want to put as we've been recording so far, I've been trying to write up our defense, and I can't do it because we don't want to put Dumoulin back on that first line, even though we might have to now. Pettersson's still here. We have Ty Smith now to add in. Don't forget Joseph signed a one-way contract. I mean, that doesn't mean too much. He's just go to waivers. And Friedman can still do it. Now we're bumping Shaq Ruido out of the contract. Trying to write up this defensive roster right now is extremely hard. And that's why I'm thinking more moves still need to be made.
Yeah, and the big thing that I look at when I look at this move specifically is Jeff Petry has played those bulk minutes in Montreal. He's carried the workload for the Montreal Canadiens, especially last season when Shea Weber was absent due to injury, because that tells me that, hey, even though Chris Letang is 35, he's not going to have to carry as much of a load. They're going to require Jeff Petry to start taking some of those minutes off of Chris Letang's shoulders, whether that be on the penalty kill, even though Petry isn't the most phenomenal penalty killing defenseman. It seems like he'll get a little bit more of the penalty kill share, which lowers Letang's minutes there. And at 5-on-5, it seems as if they'll be able to deploy a second pairing with Jeff Petry a little bit more than they were when it was John Marino. So maybe it takes a little bit off the shoulders of Chris Letang, which allows him to play better. I mean, that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at whenever this inevitably gets going at the beginning of October. I want to see how that deployment looks with Todd Reirden's system. But if it takes a little ice time away from Letang and it takes a little bit off of his shoulders and Petry is able to carry that load, then it's not that awful of a move. The one thing that I will say, though, is with Mike Matheson, he had one of his best seasons of his career last year. He was actually doing very well. I would have put him on the top pairing with Chris Letang heading into next season as far as where the defensive core was at before all these moves were made early in the week last week. But when you look at Jeff Petry, I think it's a nice addition. I think we'll have to obviously wait and see how it all works out. But having the top two on the right side be Chris Letang, then Jeff Petry, it's not an awful situation to be in if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins.
No, it's not awful. It's just old.
It is old. That is a concern. It is old.
If there's one thing the Penguins committed to this season, just look up and down all of the signs. It was, we're not worried about getting younger this offseason, clearly. Yeah. And that's, while again, I think even with discussing those earlier contracts, that's fine for now. That's fine for this season and next season. You do have to try and get younger at some point if you want to remain competitive after this era is over. I think too many fans are slipping into this idea of, oh, this team's going to be really bad come 3-4 years anyway. They don't have to be. They don't have to be. They can middle around, maybe still squeak into the playoffs, but they don't have to be an outright bad team. There is a way of doing things that can extend success past this era. It might be hard, especially if you want to remain successful through the end of it, and then going off from there. But it would involve acquiring guys like a Ty Smith, a young guy who's going to have a future ahead of him. Also holding on to a John Marino who's young and can still rebuild off of a bad season and can be a young guy in the future. And then building off of I'm trying to remember how old Mark Friedman is, 26. Mark Friedman can middle around for a minute, but then also focusing on your younger players like Ryan Poehling, 23. So something that could still be had there. because you're not going to be able to do it through the draft. You're trying to remain competitive and still be good. So you're not going to be getting the top 10 picks.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a way for the Penguins to do it. It just would involve getting younger now rather than later. But we've already committed to a 36-year-old, 35-year-old. Sid's still around. Brian Russ is going to be 31 soon-ish. And Jeff Petry is 35, 34.
34.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the top end of the Pittsburgh Penguins is getting older while the bottom end is getting a little bit younger. I mean, you look at Ryan Poehling, you just mentioned, is 23 years of age. And also the fact that he is something that while the Penguins didn't really care about getting younger this offseason very much, one thing they did care about is getting bigger and getting more truculence, as Brian Burke would say. Poehling is part of that. He is a big-bodied net front presence for the bottom six. He does have a decent scoring touch, which is better than we've seen in past years with guys like Dominic Simone and Zach Aston-Reese. He does bring a little bit more to that. He's really good in the net front, almost like a Patrick Hornqvist type, not as good when it comes to the offensive abilities, but he's really good with deflections in front of the net. He's really good at finding those garbage goals and scoring really close to the crease. And also, when you look at the way that he's able to score, last year you saw a little bit more of a better wrist shot. He has a quick release that has a decent accuracy to it. So a nice addition to the bottom six, in my opinion. It's not the guy that everybody was hoping for. I know I had written a piece about Sonny Milano. There was Calle Yarncroke that I had my eyes on. Ryan Poehling was not on that list, but that's really in the Ron Hextall school of thought of, we're not going to go out and get the big names. We're not even going to go out and get the second tier names. We're going to find these guys that you weren't thinking of and see how it goes. And that's what Ryan Poehling is.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, the numbers aren't all that much to speak of. And you don't take the minus 21 into account because that is just the very bad Montreal Canadiens. But those numbers are not super ideal. They're good enough for the bottom six, and he's going to be a factor in this team. It's weird because it is not the piece that we've all been looking at. We've all been striving for. I think for a long time, people were talking about bringing in JT Miller, bringing in other names, Ryan Poehling.
Yeah.
That's what we've got. So we have to do with what we got. And also, how about that signing that was announced? I think it was by Friedman, by Elliott, during Hextall's press conference. And he said, no, how about Josh Archibald, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah, that's still weird because Johan Larsson hasn't signed anywhere, and Friedman's usually pretty on point. So I don't know if something fell apart Friedman didn't know about. I have no idea what happened there, but it was very interesting that Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet reported that the Pittsburgh Penguins were signing Johan Larsson, a bottom 6'4" that can play center, bigger bodied guy. And 2 minutes later in his press conference, Ron Hextall just basically said, no, I can't say that that's true, but I can tell you that Josh Archibald, which was previously unreported, is going to be a Pittsburgh Penguin.
Ron Hextall, the insider. I mean, that's good due diligence on whoever asked him the question about that in the middle of the press conference. I'm sure they just had tweet notifications on. They see that pop up, and immediately you have to go, how did you just sign a deal? You've been talking with us for the last 10 minutes. So good on that person, or whoever was that asked, because not only did he not sign off on it, but he followed it up immediately with Josh Archibald. Again, we're bringing a cup champion back into the fold. So if you want to look at the bright side of Josh Archibald, it is that.
Yeah, Josh Archibald's a very interesting character, to say the least. We'll get into him a little later in the summer. But let's talk about the other trade that happened on Saturday, because it was an interesting day for Ron Hextall and company with the Pittsburgh Penguins, as he traded away John Marino to the division rival New Jersey Devils, getting back 22-year-old defenseman Ty Smith, as well as a 2023 third-round draft pick. Horwat, when you saw that Marino was going to the Devils, were you shocked? Did you think the Penguins should have gotten more in a Marino deal? And what do you think of Ty Smith?
So I wasn't shocked. I think I had been expecting this for a little while now. As much as I didn't want it to happen because I wanted to see John Marino stay here, I wasn't surprised by it because that had been for so long. I'd basically come to accept it. But I don't hate the return either. I mean, I said it's pretty much like moving deck chairs. How old did you say he was?
22.
22. So we subtract 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't terrible. For a 25-year-old John Marino, and he switches sides on the line, so that kind of opens up the Jan Rutta situation, which is okay to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not shocked by it. I think Ty Smith has a decent enough future ahead of him that we can really do something with. He's going to be on the left side. He's going to hope to rebuild. He was on the all-rookie team in whatever year it was, so it gives you something. I mean, when you look at it, the Penguins did pick up a couple of first-round picks, player-wise, because Ty Smith was a former first-round pick. Paling was a former first-round pick. We've got guys that were picked in the first 30 of the league, so that's a solid start. It's just a matter of seeing how they pan out. I think Ty Smith can pan out, though. People were not impressed with John Marino recently, and that's totally fair. He was getting paid a lot of money from a different management group. That's the other part of it. John Marino is not a Ron Hextall and Brian Burke guy. He is a Jim Rutherford guy. And that plays, people don't say this too often, that plays a big factor into these sorts of deals. And when a management change happens, they want their people in there. I mean, why do you think Mark Friedman came into the fold? Why do you think Jeff Carter is on this team? They want their guys. So sending off Mike Matheson was a good thing because he wasn't their guy. Was Jeff Petry the right return? No, we'll see. Sending off John Marino made sense because he's not a Ron Hextall guy, and he has not played the same these past couple seasons as he did in his rookie year. We can remember talking in his rookie year that he should be up for Calder votes. He has not had that same ability since. So there will be interesting things to come from this. I do think this can be a bonus. I think this can be a benefit. I think the Penguins can absolutely make this one a net positive, much more than the Petry deal.
Two things on this deal, John Marino for Ty Smith. One thing that I want to mention, and Josh Yowie hit it right on the head, is John Marino has an excellent career ahead of him. He's an excellent NHL defenseman, but he was paid too much too early by Jim Rutherford. And I think that is a perfect encapsulation of what the issues were with John Marino the last couple of seasons, where that he was getting paid a little too much before he got to that level of play. And we just don't know if he's going to get there. I believe that he will. I think he also echoed that sentiment, but he just hasn't been there yet. And at $4.4 million, when you have so much money on your blue line, that's somebody that is going to be tradable. That's somebody that is going to get interest around the league. And that's why John Marino ended up being the first guy to go on the Pittsburgh Penguins blue line. But on the other end of things for John Marino is we didn't really know what he was, because his first year, like you mentioned, hey, this could be a guy that takes Chris Letang's role. He has an offensive upside. He's really good defensively. He isn't the fastest skater, but he does have some pretty good skating ability. But he never really defined, was he a defensive defenseman? Was he an offensive defenseman? We were still waiting for that offensive part to return from his rookie year. He started to kind of shift towards defensive defenseman last season, so he wasn't really defined. With Ty Smith, we know what he is. He is an offensive defenseman. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He played in the New Jersey Devils top four to start last season, and then he was dropped down to play with PK Subban on the bottom pairing. I would say that if you get somebody more defensively, and this was also information given to me by Neil Villapiano of the Devil State of Mind podcast. He's a very good friend of the show. He said, if you get somebody good on the opposite side of him that is a good, stable defensive force, then Ty Smith is going to be allowed to do what he can, which is produce offensively, which is what you want him to do. I think if you put him next to a Chad Ruhwedel, if you put him next to a Jan Rutta in a third pairing role, you're going to see this kid create a lot of offense for the Pittsburgh Penguins, which is a net positive. Also, the fact is the main thing in this entire deal, the main acquisition for the Penguins was salary cap space. So
Yeah, and then we ended up blowing that up on Jeff Petry. But yes.
yes, but if you take it piece by piece, they got salary cap space, a defenseman that is 3 years younger and in a more defined role as far as what he is in the NHL, and a third-round pick. A lot of people are saying that the Penguins didn't get enough for John Marino. I disagree. I think they did a good job in this trade.
You weren't going to get any more than this. I think that may have been a part of it too. Like, yeah, if you were to make this trade last year, I bet you get a little more.
Maybe.
But we saw his value depreciate over time.
Mm-hmm.
That was just the way of the season for John Marino. Is we saw him have that outstanding rookie season. We talked about him getting Calder votes, and then he had the sophomore slump. Like, it's fine, he can rebuild from it. If you would have traded him right then and there, you probably would have gotten more. But again, you held on to him because you're thinking sophomore slump, he can rebuild it. And then he started to a little bit, and then things happen. Hockey's a hard game. Hockey is a wild game, and he just had a decline. That's all. It was just his time to go, and we got what we could for him. And putting Ty Smith with the Jan Rutta makes a lot of sense. Letting those two kind of let Jan Rutta be defensive, letting Ty Smith be offensive, and honestly, I think Ruido got pushed out of this lineup.
And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of deck chairs that still need to be moved for the Pittsburgh Penguins defense, because like we said, and we're going to continue to say, and this was initially brought up by Danny Shirey on the opening of free agency day, and he said, you have 9 defensemen. Are you going to have 9 defensemen to start the season? And Ron Hextall says, no, there's going to be moves coming. Well, 2 moves later, where they traded out 2 defensemen, where they're still at 9. So we'll talk about that in the second segment.
And then you follow that quote up with another one about 9 defensemen, and he said it's possible.
On Saturday.
I have to look for that one.
On Saturday, I have the quote down here. We'll discuss in a little bit. But when I look at these deals as a whole together that happened on Saturday, both defensemen had slightly lower underlying numbers, but they were also on worse teams. So maybe they come in, maybe Todd Reirden's system is a nice change of pace for them, and maybe they get to the level of the players that we shipped out, if not a little bit better, with a combined salary cap that is lower than the 2 that the Penguins shipped out. So that's my overall thoughts on the in for out from yesterday.
And I agree. We just have to see it play out. More moves need to be made. It was deck chair moving, it seemed. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, the first deal, we got cap space by sending off the $4 million John Marino for league min Ty Smith. Cool. And then poof, it's all gone because we decided to send off another big contract, acquire another big contract. So deck chairs.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say before we cut to a quick break and come back and talk a little bit about Jan Rutta is a lot of people I saw on social media asking, why isn't Marcus Pettersson the defenseman that is being sent out in any of these deals? Why is Marcus Pettersson not being rumored to be sent out in any of these deals? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's because the value isn't there. The value is not there for Marcus Pettersson at, I think he's $4.025 million or something like that for another 3 years. That's not something that the league in a whole is looking at as desirable right now. And the Pittsburgh Penguins were looking to get some decent returns. You weren't going to get Jeff Petry in anything involving Marcus Pettersson. You weren't going to get Ty Smith and a pick for anything involving Marcus Pettersson. If you're going to trade Marcus Pettersson, and I do believe that somebody around the league that has the cap space would take Marcus Pettersson, but you're not going to get him for very much in return. Maybe future cap considerations, maybe a 5th or 6th round pick, but you're not getting much for Marcus Pettersson in return this summer.
Yeah, you're not. You're just not. As much as he's been in the trade rumors for couple of years now, it's just not going to happen because it's like the John Marino effect. He's depreciating over time now. He's not getting any better, which hurts his trade value and it hurts the team and is trying to send him off. I'm not saying we're stuck with him because he's still fine enough, but he needs to improve his game and he needs to improve his trade value one way or the other.
And here's the thing with Pettersson too. He didn't have a bad season last year either. It wasn't what he was when he first came over to the Penguins. It wasn't what he was when he signed that deal. I believe Rutherford signed that deal as well. But you know what it is? It's a good defensive defenseman, and he would be a fantastic defensive partner for Jeff Petry. If that ends up happening, I think that could really be beneficial for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because I do still believe that Marcus Pettersson is a top 4 defenseman, but I think he's on the lower half of that spectrum. But he's still a top 4 defenseman to me in the NHL.
Yeah, he can be. He totally can be. He just needs to really remain there.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about the Jan Rutta deal, and then we'll try to piece together this defense core, because there's a lot of pieces going left, going right, all over the place for this defense. We'll talk about that right after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. Of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins made multiple trades on Saturday afternoon to bring in multiple defensemen while shipping out multiple defensemen. But not only that, but on the opening day of free agency, I talked about it on Thursday's episode. Horwat was unfortunately unable to give his opinion on it, so we'll talk about it now. The Penguins sign defenseman Jan Rutta, 3 years, $2.75 million. Rutta is a 6'2", 204-pound defenseman that is right-handed, but has the ability to play on both sides. Horwat, what do you think about two-time Stanley Cup champion Jan Rutta joining the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Let me take it off mute and let you know. I really like this deal. It's not because it's not long, it's not super expensive, and he's sure, here, buzzwords. He's got the cup pedigree to come from Tampa Bay to join another team that has cup ambitions at this point. It's a pretty good deal. I thought right away he could play in the Ruedel spot. He can move up to play in the Marino position if he's one of the ones that ends up getting shipped off. Turns out he was, and I thought just for sure that's where he would land, just that second line role. But he can flip into either, the second line or third line. He's going to play behind Letang. It should be a pretty good deal for him. Should be a pretty good deal for the Penguins. I really enjoyed this one when it came down, just because not only does he have the cup pedigree for 2 straight victories and then the third appearance, being a solid defenseman, he's a name that you recognize too. Mm-hmm. That was the first thing that came across my mind is, it's a name that I recognize. Like, whenever we made the Tanev signing a couple years ago, I was like, who's this? There's another Tanev in the league? I didn't know who he was. So it was good just getting someone that it's a name you recognize. It's a name that can do things. Mm-hmm. So getting a namesake name sometimes is really beneficial. And it brings something to the table. He's done stuff. He's popular enough to be a game changer at the right time. In the right role, this should work out perfectly. I like this deal a lot.
When I look at Jan Rutta, and I know you mentioned that, hey, he might be able to sit into that Ruedel spot, which honestly would make the Penguins' right side very interesting with Letang, Petry, and Rutta as your top 3.
It would.
And we'll talk about the exact defensive configuration that I sent out to a couple people yesterday, and that's not where I have him, because whenever you look at where he played last season, he did play on the right side, but he played on the first pairing with Victor Hedman for the majority of the season last year for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So he's played with top of the line, top tier talent on the defensive side, and he's a defensive defenseman. I feel, and we'll talk about the entirety of it and get into it a little bit more, I feel that considering he can play on both sides, if he's as comfortable as people say on the left side, put him with Letang on that top pairing, because he's somebody that has that experience, played with Victor Hedman last season. If you don't think that he couldn't play with Chris Letang then too, that makes it much more interesting. So a Rutta Letang first pairing is something that intrigues me, and I think we'll possibly see that as well.
It's interesting. It's just a matter of, does that fit the Mike Sullivan school of thought?
That's the only thing. He doesn't like to play people on their offside very often, but I feel like if it's somebody that's as defensively inclined as Rutta playing with somebody like Chris Letang, I feel like it would make sense there, because we looked at last season, the one player that always played on the opposite side was Mark Friedman. Mark Friedman, for a minute there, I believe Mark Friedman was a left-handed shot because he was playing left defense the entire time with Ruhwedel, but he's right-handed. And I feel like if he's willing to bend a little bit for Mark Friedman, for somebody like Jan Rutta, who could be really good for Chris Letang, I feel like that's a position that Sullivan would be okay with if it worked out.
It would have to work out perfectly because that's a lot of minutes to stick the off-wing guy on. But if he's that comfortable and it works out, absolutely go for it. Such an odd first-line defensive pairing, especially when you know at least Letang's been playing half the game. It'll just be how comfortable he is and how he performs there. I don't hate the idea either, because I do want to see somebody new up there. Not that we don't, think Dumoulin's great, but he's just not anymore. So someone new up there is a bonus and it benefits the team. It just has to work out.
Yeah, and I think here's the last point I'll make on it before we get into the actual entirety of this defense core, which is right now very interesting. It's an enigma, to say the least. If you put Rutta on the left side with Letang, that helps Letang because you get him a defensive guy. Also, Rutta has dealt with that type of minutes load last season because he played with Victor Hedman on the top pairing for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then you add Jeff Petry, which could lower the 5-on-5 minutes for that top pairing. So it means Rutta's not playing half the game because neither is Chris Letang. So I think that's a thought process that could happen for Mike Sullivan. I'm not saying that's what Ron Hextall and Sullivan are thinking as of right now. We'll have to wait for a month or two until training camp starts to start seeing where these guys are playing, who they're playing with. But I do think that that's something that you could see as a configuration this season.
Could be. Very well could be.
Well, speaking of configurations, Horwat, the Penguins do have a very overstocked defenseman right now. I mean, just defense core, I should say. 9 NHL-capable defensemen, only 6 suit up for, a sane coach. There's always those insane coaches that like to play with 7 defensemen and 11 forwards. But most sane NHL head coaches only play 6 defensemen. So the fact that the Penguins now have 9 capable defensemen on the roster, something has to give. Do you think another trade's coming down the pike? Because on Saturday, when asked again, hey, you have 9 defensemen, does that mean another trade's coming? Ron Hextall said not necessarily. So we're not sure what's going on with Ron Hextall, whether or not another one of these defensemen are going to be moved. If you had to take a guess, Horwat, do you think somebody else gets moved? And if so, who do you think is that player?
I absolutely do think someone does get moved. I think they get packaged with a forward because I'm trying to also write up the forward lineup here, and I want to rip my eyes out. Like, first of all, I don't even remember signing Drake
Caggiula.
I don't remember signing Drake Caggiula. I think I woke up to that one.
It was thrown in there right after the Archibald training signing at 9 o'clock at night. Yeah.
That's why. Okay. Yeah. I'm assuming a forward would get bumped into that trade as well so we can get a forward back because this bottom 6 is horrendous right now. Horrendous. So, yeah, I would assume another trade does happen. And if it does, it's going to be hopefully Pettersson before his full no move. Before his clause kicks in, just so he's easier to move around and you have more options. That would be my first selection, and then bump Dumoulin down the lineup for like you want. Jan Rutta can slip in there. Oh, man, it's so hard because you can't lose a left defenseman either. Because who's good enough to play top line left D? You think Jan Rutta? That's fine. But other than that, I don't want Pettersson up there. Ty Smith's not good enough yet. Joseph's not good enough yet.
Yeah, it seems like if it's not going to be Rutta, it's probably going to be Brian Dumoulin again.
Yes. And hopefully that fetches back another top defenseman. But we still have to do this bottom 6 has to get worked out.
And honestly, I wasn't planning on it, but we can touch on it a little bit in a couple minutes. But when you look at the Penguins defense, the left side, there's 4 NHL-capable defensemen. Brian Dumoulin, Marcus Pettersson, Ty Smith, and P.O. Joseph. I like the fact that the bottom 2 there are 23 years old and 22 years old, respectively. You're getting a little bit younger in certain areas because basically what you got in Ty Smith now is another prospect. Even though he's played in the NHL for 2 straight seasons, you basically get another prospect because he's a 22-year-old defenseman, because he has offensive abilities, and maybe in the Todd Reirden system, he does get a little bit better on those defensive metrics. But you also have a guy like Pettersson who I think if there's a move, I think it's between Pettersson and Ruhwedel. I truly do because I think the Penguins, Ron Hextall, Mike Sullivan, they all love Mark Friedman. And Mark Friedman is a fantastic option as a seventh defenseman. He really is, because he's a guy that we've seen come in cold, be able to play really well, gets under people's skin, makes an impact on the game. So I don't think Mark Friedman has to worry about that. Chad Ruhwedel is under a really good contract right now, I believe, for the next 2 seasons at a very low cap hit. So that's desirable. The fact that he is a defensive defenseman on the right side is desirable. He can move the puck fairly well. He doesn't make too many mistakes. I could see Ruhwedel potentially being the one on the way out. Pettersson has been rumored forever. He's going to continue to be rumored. I don't hate the fact that Marcus Pettersson is still on the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I do think that if they're willing to just try to offload that cap hit, a move can be made. Like I said, future considerations, 5th round pick, 6th round pick, 7th. That is probably what you're looking at for Marcus Pettersson. Something along the lines of one of those picks or future considerations. You don't see future considerations very often unless it's Vegas Golden Knights trading somebody away. But when you look at the defense, it's probably going to be between Pettersson or Ruhwedel to me.
It's going to have to be it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then Ruhwedel makes sense. My other thought is, too, is are we willing to trade away one of the guys we just acquired already? How quickly are we willing to overturn this? And that goes with the forwards. How fast are we willing to bring him in, say thank you for your time, you're gone already?
Yeah.
We saw it a couple times at the trade deadline. I think Nolan Patrick went to teams pretty quickly, so it's not uncommon in the NHL. But how willing are we, as the Penguins, to do that? How willing is Ron Hextall to do that? I just don't think willing enough at all.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was to happen to anyone, it would be the forwards, though. Because you look at these, because we acquired NHL-ready defensemen.
Yeah. And
that's part of it.
Yeah, and I'll touch on the forwards here in a minute. But before I do that, I want to run this defensive structure by you, because this is what I texted to a bunch of people yesterday. And most of them said, that makes a lot of sense, especially, and it leads off with the D pairing that I talked about earlier. Jan Rutta, Chris Letang as your top pairing. I think that gives Dumoulin the opportunity to take on less minutes and play with Jeff Petry on the second pairing. And then the third pairing of Ty Smith and Chad Ruhwedel. That's where it starts. And then if P.O. Joseph comes into training camp, plays really well, so shows that he is ready, puts Smith on the right side and put Joseph on the left, and that's your third pairing. You're on mute again.
Yes, I am. I'm trying to relieve as much echo as possible. You said Ty Smith on the right side?
I believe, yeah, he has played the right side before in his NHL career.
According to Cap Friendly, he is a left or right defenseman. Yes. Yeah, I think that could be fun. That could work. Yeah, I mean, I'm just drawing this up in my head, and I'm still struggling with it. I think, you don't want to overplay Ty Smith or P.O. Joseph quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be confident. And you want to be sure of Jan Rutta on the first line. I don't totally hate what you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, I think changes still do need to be made, though. There's no question about that. I want to throw asterisks all over every lineup we talk about right now, even after making 2 trades in the same day, within the same hour almost. By the way, those were quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do want to throw asterisks all over this lineup, but hey, I like where your head's at with the defensive core. The defensive core can be done. This can be solid. We look at Dumoulin still and say he can still do it in the proper fold.
Mm-hmm.
Pettersson might be the odd man out. We know Joseph's got up-and-coming talent. Ty Smith can rebuild something. And we know Jan Rutta and Jeff Petry have desire to continue to be successful. I'm not saying the Canadiens weren't successful, but we watched them go to the Cup final. Let's not forget that. We watched them beat us in the bubble. They were a bad team last year. Somehow, some way, Jeff Petry was a part of it. They found ways to be successful in the last handful of seasons.
And Jeff Petry was pretty good as well on that, especially in that run to the Stanley Cup final. Jeff Petry was one of the most important players for that Canadiens back end.
Yeah, so this could be a good defensive core. It just all things have to go right.
Mm-hmm. I will say the one thing that bothers me about the potential Smith-Joseph pairing is I don't know if Joseph is defensively, structurally good enough to help a guy like Ty Smith. Like Ty Smith, his defensive metrics are abysmal. It's bad. It does not look good. It looked like the Pittsburgh Penguins acquired a busted 22-year-old prospect, but he's 22 years old. He has offensive capabilities. And if you pair him with a good defensive defenseman, not a guy like, PK Subban, who for all his woes is not great on his own zone. Right. If you can get him with the right guy, like a Ruedel, like a Rutta if you need to, I think Ty Smith could be a very good addition to the Penguins' bottom pairing. I don't think he's a top 4 guy, which is where he was for the Devils at the beginning of last season, but he could be a very good bottom pairing guy that creates offense for the Penguins at the bottom of that lineup, because the bottom 6 is interesting for the Pittsburgh Penguins now. Going into this week, the Penguins had 3 bottom 6 players under contract, and that was Jeff Carter, Teddy Bluger, and who's the other one I'm thinking of? McGinn. And Brock McGinn. That's right. I wrote an entire story on him and completely forgot about him. So you have 3 guys that are going to be in the Penguins' bottom 6. Then you look at the fact that it seems as if Ron Hextall is very confident that Kasperi Kapanen will return next season. That's 4. We all agree that Drew O'Connor should get more playing time next year. That's 5. You add Ryan Poehling, that's 6. That's your bottom 6. It's not pretty. There's a lot of question marks. You have to see how it plays out a lot because none of these players have really played together. And then you also have Caggiula as an injury replacement. You have Josh Archibald as an injury replacement. You have Alex Nylander, who you brought back, that could fight for that spot. You have Valtteri Pustin, who is young, but he could fight for that spot. You have a lot of options down there, but it's not as good as, we were all talking. Sonny Milano, Calle Yarncroke, get JT Miller, drop Jason Zucker. These were all great things in theory, but I feel like we all got lulled into a sense of safety with Ron Hextall and not realizing that it is Ron Hextall. He's not going to go out and get JT Miller. So that's what the Penguins' bottom 6 is now. That's probably what the bottom 6 is going to be going into the season, unless something changes in the next month. But Ron Hextall on Saturday seemed confident that this is probably the roster he's heading into camp with. And if that's the case, they have options in the bottom 6 through the Pittsburgh Penguins, but it's just going to be a lot different than we've seen in the past.
Boy, oh boy. These bottom 6 players, you look at them and you just hope maybe they can just turn into the Scott Wilson, all the names that I'm now forgetting.
Tom Kuhnhackl.
The Tom Kuhnhackls, the Brian Rust whenever he was down there. The Connor Sheary when Connor Sheary played with Crosby. Mm-hmm. But those guys, the Bonino, the Kessel, they're not going to turn into Bonino, Kessel, Hagelin. We know that.
Yeah.
But maybe someone, especially Phil Kessel, they're not going to turn into that Phil Kessel, but maybe someone can turn into the playmaker that Bonino was. Of those 3, I feel like Bonino might be the most reachable for these guys. And ironically enough, he is the center. We know Carter's not doing that really. We know Bluger might be able to do that if he can get his offense to wake up a little. Mm-hmm. But he's playing with one of Ryan Poehling, Kasperi Kapanen, Brock McGinn, Josh Archibald, redeems the horn of Drew O'Connor, and then minor league players because that's where they go. Mm-hmm. Boy, oh boy, is that hard to get an offensive ability going whenever those are your options.
Yeah.
This bottom 6 is rough. And as a matter of fact, who we haven't even mentioned because he's not going to be in the top 6 come face off is Jason Zucker. He should probably be in the bottom 6 because he's always injured. He's another depreciating asset. Mm-hmm. Can he still rebuild it? I believe he still has that ability despite the injuries, and I'm going to hold out hope he can still do something. But I don't want to see him playing with Malkin. That's just me. But he has to because he's obviously better than everyone else I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. We're in a sticky situation in the offense, and we really shouldn't be when our goal was to bring back Rust, Malkin, and Raquel. We acquired that. And we have filled out everything else with what looks like not nonsense, but cast-offs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the lineup itself is going to be interesting. A lot of people, when the Penguins brought back both Malkin, Raquel, and Letang all in one weekend, said, oh, so you're just running it back. You called it insanity, said doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think this is qualified now as a different thing. I don't think you can say that is the definition of insanity, because look at the fact that the Penguins have now brought in 3 different defensemen for the back end. They have a guy in Ryan Poehling that's going to be different. I'm sure Nylander's going to get into there. So it's going to look a lot different. The only thing that's going to be the same is probably the Penguins' top 6, which, to be honest, wasn't awful to begin with.
Right. The top 6 is great. We love the top 6. They just have to now be the ones that outscore all the problems.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to talk about, and luckily for us, we'll have 2 months without basically any news to talk about it between now and NHL training camps beginning. But we have one last thing for today, our weekly Pens poll. We asked which Penguins minor leaguer will play the most games at the NHL level next season. And Alex Nylander won the poll with 52% of the vote. Valtteri Puustinen came in second with 30%. Sam Poulin, former first-round pick of the Penguins, got 16%. And I feel like 1 or 2 people just had pity votes ready and voted for Nathan Legare, who finished with 2% of the vote.
Man, you asked that question before the answer may have become none of them, because none of them are playing in the NHL this year somehow.
I feel like Nylander will.
Nylander might squeak in there. He might win this bet by like 5 games because we brought in Poehling, Kajula, Archibald, Zahorna, Drew O'Connor still needs to play. But you know what? We're the Penguins. Injuries happen everywhere, all the time. All four of those guys might make it just by necessity. Mm-hmm. So it could be interesting. You never know. I will say I think Nylander probably does take the gold on this, though. Just by sheer fact of he's got the NHL experience. He should be the first one in line there. And injuries always happen. Man, I want this team to be good so bad, but this bottom 6 looks so horrible.
And you never know how it's going to actually end up looking, because think about the fact that for a while, we didn't know what we were going to get whenever we looked at the 4th line, and it was, oh no, this is Zach Aston-Reese, Teddy Bluger, and Brandon Tanev, and all of a sudden that turned into one of the most reliable lines for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So I'm not sure what the bottom 6 is going to look like for the Penguins. We mentioned there's like 7 or 8 names of players that could potentially be in those spots. Now, there's nobody that really blows you away in that bottom 6. But if I had to just try to randomly put together the bottom 6 today we're recording this on Sunday, July 17th. If I had to try to just piece together a bottom 6 for the Pittsburgh Penguins, thinking that Kapanen's probably going to resign, I would say it's probably going to end up being Kapanen, Carter, Nylander, McGinn, Bluger, O'Connor. That's what I would guess ends up being the bottom 6.
I don't hate that. I currently have just because I haven't looked in too much further, Carter centering Kapanen and Poehling, Bluger centering McGinn and Kajula. Poehling, yes. So we'll see how it goes, because that leaves in no particular order. Like you mentioned, Josh Archibald, Radim Zahorna, Alex Nylander, Drew O'Connor, and Valtteri Puustinen, among others. So, that's a struggle.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The thing that I think we can take away from all of this is there's going to be a lot of training camp battles in that bottom 6, which is fun. It'll be fun to go to training camp. It'll be fun to watch those preseason games and see who ends up etching out the other person for those bottom 6 roster positions. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a busy week for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll watch as things start to taper down into the slow season of the NHL offseason, which is usually August 1st until September 10th or something like that. But we will be back every single Monday and Thursday with new episodes of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys on Thursday.